Hello and welcome to the fourth of our professional photo podcasts. As always, it's time to make a brew, relax and turn up the volume as we bring you a fortnightly slice of everything you need to know from the world of professional photography. My name is Matty Graham, I'm contributing editor on the magazine, and this time around we're doing things a little bit differently. Editor Terry is hard at work sending the magazine to press, so this episode we're dedicating the whole show to the Canon R5. Now, we chatted last time around about this camera's specifications, but this time we've gone one better, and in a moment we're going to be speaking to a top working pro called Michael O'Sullivan, who is one of the first pros to get their hands on the R5. Michael has written a full review for us in the forthcoming issue, and there's also plenty other of great content to be read, including tips on how to edit with Affinity Photo software. So, without further ado, let's dive straight in and hear more about the fantastic Canon R5. Hey Michael, welcome to the podcast. So you're a professional photographer based in County Cork and you specialise in commercial and fine art photography. And Michael, you're probably one of the first working pros to get their hands on Canon's new beast of a camera, the R5. And you kindly put together a review for us for the next issue. So we won't talk about that too much, but we couldn't wait till then. So we wanted to have a little conversation on the podcast about your experiences with the R5. So, Michael, can you start by telling us a bit about yourself and what cameras you'd been using before you had the R5?
Well, thanks for the invitation, Matty. I'm delighted to be here first.
Great stuff.
In terms of a little bit of background, like I shoot everything from, for some of my clients, I would shoot everything from low-level commercial or marketing, PR type stuff, through to, website imagery, product imagery, fashion editorial stuff, feature type imagery, and right through to advertising campaign type stuff. So I could, from one day to the next I could be shooting anything. And then on the flip side, I tend to do my own personal work, a lot of the what people would call the fine art stuff, the things you're doing just for the sake of self-expression and exhibition and things like that. So more in the fine art area, one day I could be shooting in the studio with full control, and another day I'm shooting in the woods or something with smoke machines and really low light. And then for the commercial stuff, I could be shooting, really static product photography 1 minute and very, very high speed action stuff the next. So I would tend to put my cameras to the test a little bit, should we say.
Absolutely. So you work them hard.
Yeah. So for that reason, I've used everything then over the years from 5 series bodies up to 1 series bodies. Occasionally I'd have had a 7D maybe as a backup on occasion, but the last few years mostly the 5 series cameras, because like there was a time where you could get the high resolution from a 5 series camera that like when the 5D Mark II and Mark III came out, they were high resolution. Yeah. And so they would have matched as a backup to say some of the commercial work or some of the studio work or some of the fine art work. They would have matched my main camera, which would have been the 1DS Mark III back in the day. But say on the 5D Mark II, you were compromised in the sense that you didn't have the amazing autofocus system of the 1 series, and obviously the build quality of the 1 series is legendary as well. So yeah, for a long time I did kind of rely more on 1 series bodies than anything else. But then from the 5D Mark III on, the autofocus kind of caught up a little bit, not quite as much. Then the 5D Mark IV, the autofocus is class leading. The Canon dual pixel autofocus, especially the way it's implemented in something like the 5D Mark IV and the 1DX Mark III, amazing performance, amazing autofocus. So yeah, depending on what my needs were at any specific time, how much speed I was shooting versus how much resolution I needed, it would pivot between those types of cameras. I haven't owned a 1DX Mark III. I have shot with it a few times whenever I needed something just faster, but resolution is still important to me, so I would have focused on the higher res bodies where at all possible, so my main commercial camera for the past couple of years then would, for that reason, have been the 5DSR.
Yeah.
And when I needed it, I would try to get my hands on a 1DX for speed, etc.
Great stuff. So you're obviously a Canon man through and through, really, by the sounds of your history. So I mean, What were your expectations when the R5 was announced and there's this big shift from DSLR to mirrorless? What were you thinking, and what eventually drew you to getting your hands on the R5?
Well, one of the reasons, look, I'm not, I don't obviously work for Canon or anything like that, but when you get used to a system and you know how it works, it's easier for you to perform better if you know your equipment inside out, because you're not thinking about the equipment, you're not worrying about it. But one of the things that was, always important to me is, even though I'm kind of particular about things like confirming my focus and things like that, and I think if you read a lot of stuff online, it's easy to see that, some of the things that we used to take for granted, maybe even 8-9 years ago, you don't see them mentioned as much anymore. People don't want to have to think behind the camera as much as they used to. So a lot of the trends in the world of, the features that appear in cameras and the type of technology that's implemented, a lot of them have been geared towards a lot of extra bells and whistles, which to me, to be fair, they're not the kind of things that, usually represent the difference between achieving your great shot or not. I mean, some of them are nice to haves, and I think in the review I did go into a little bit of detail on separating out the two. But what was most important to me is the responsiveness of the camera, that I didn't feel like it was lagging, and that the autofocus could be relied on. Even though I like to confirm my focus by just being careful, whatever type of autofocus I'm using, you still want the confidence to know that it's nailing things, right? So I mean, I have looked at other manufacturers' bodies over the years. I have friends and colleagues who have used different makes of camera, and I have side by side played with both, and I have shot with either or.
Yeah.
But for me, what keeps me coming back to the Canon, the EOS bodies time and time again is just the fact that I don't think there's anything can touch, especially in recent years, even again, with the dual pixel autofocus. Canon, it could be argued, we're lagging behind in some of the other areas, like the eye detection, which to me was a bells and whistle. It was a nice to have. But, my traditional method of shooting over the years was always picking my focus points, composing that way, and, then relying on the very, very accurate autofocus system. In terms of, my expectations then for the EOS R5, I have been shooting with an EOS R. I did jump into the mirrorless pool over the past few years. I have been shooting with an EOS R. I mean, the easy thing about that was the fact that I could adapt it for my EF lenses, which is phenomenal.
Yeah.
And I was even surprised on that to find that even adapted, the performance of the EF lenses on that body were pretty much identical to the performance of the RF lenses. And the RF glass, obviously, they've made another step up with the bigger mount. Obviously, they could improve the optics as well. So the RF glass is stellar. I mean, we were almost getting complacent in thinking that some of the L series zooms, because they had gotten so sharp and so good. I mean, for me, it hasn't been necessary to use a prime lens in years, except maybe, I think the only one I still have is my macro. The zooms had gotten so good, it was easy to think that things couldn't get any better and any sharper. And then the 5DSR came out, and that tested some of your lenses. So if you didn't have the most recent generation of lenses, you could see that, we could push the envelope a little further. But then the RF glass is stellar. So it was easy for me to jump in, wet my feet with the mirrorless system with the EOS R. But I did feel the only thing I found with the EOS R, I sometimes felt when looking through the viewfinder, and I think this is what threw a lot of people off, and a lot of people felt that the autofocus system wasn't quite up there, because in the EVF, even though it's a great EVF and it's very sharp and responsive, the animation of the AF points, especially during eye detection, I figure that actually lagged behind the actual autofocus system quite a bit, because I often would feel I was missing shots, where when I reviewed it afterwards, I actually wasn't really missing as many as I had thought.
Right.
So I think the responsiveness in that regard meant it didn't quite feel as as instant or as seamless to me. So I still would have, for really, really, really critical work, relied more on the 5D Mark IV, for example. So then, but having seen the implementation of the technology in the EOS R, the route Canon went with the mirrorless system, and knowing that, look, the 5D Mark IV autofocus system, especially if you get to know it, is an incredible autofocus system. I mean, it's an outstanding autofocus system. and the fact that the way it had performed, I mean, I had been often shooting at events or, doing shooting work where I needed to expose for really, really low ambient light while also incorporating lighting, etc.
Yeah.
And one of the things I found was that, the responsiveness in live view of the 5D Mark IV in really, really, really low lighting was ridiculously fast. So I was kind of hoping, but I was pretty confident that I was optimistic that when Canon implemented the mirrorless system fully and properly, that even if it behaved like the 5D Mark IV did, with all the extra benefits of mirrorless, that it would be stellar. So I kind of had my fingers crossed that I would see that in the EOS R5.
Excellent.
So
obviously you wanted, as I say, one of the first people to get it. What was it like when you first got it on set, and the comparisons you were making, not only with the DSLR cameras that you've used in the past, but also, as you say, the testing your feet in the water with the EOS R. How did the R5 stand out? Because let's face it, it's a big investment for professionals to make. What were your thoughts?
Not wanting to go into too much detail because, like you said, it is all in the magazine.
Yes.
But the main thing for me, the first thing I noticed, obviously after the physical stuff, I mean, it felt really good. I was delighted that Canon stuck to the approach they took with the EOS R, which was not to go really, really tiny, try fit it in your day bag, because I think that's all well and good when you're using a camera and even for me, it's convenient to have something small if you are going on, trips or on holidays, and that's all great. But for day-to-day work, the comfort of your fingers is very important because, you will get fatigued fairly easily. And I've always much preferred, and I still much prefer the feel of, say, the 1DX, right? The 1 Series bodies. Nothing feels as good as those. I mean, Canon has the ergonomics nailed in those. But the first thing with the EOS R5 was that they didn't decide to go, more miniature than the EOS R.
Yeah.
But then obviously more importantly, that instant responsiveness, the feeling that the camera wasn't lagging behind your thinking, like that's important. And I, would say cameras 5D Mark IV, the 1DX series, I've never felt that the camera was slower than me. Yeah. And when you get down certain other tiers in the range, you'd start to be shooting with cameras that they're lagging behind you a little bit in terms of responsiveness. But the EOS R5, I have to say, the minute I switched it on and input a few settings and fired the shutter, apart from the feel that I mentioned, initially, like just in terms of performance, I guess because I was kind of worried that it wouldn't quite match the performance of the 1 and 5s series cameras, I was massively surprised. I don't want to use words like blown away. I don't want to sound too gushingly over it, but it was like a massive relief when I just clicked the shutter off for the first time, focusing on some when I was making the test shots, and it was like I just breathed a sigh of relief that it was like, yes, it's that fast, it's that good, it's done it right. So that was just initially, but then obviously diving into the testing, we saw more.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, obviously, as you say, people can read more in the review, and they can check out the specifications online and things like that. But what is the most important thing our readers need to know about the R5, given that you've had the experience of using it? Is there one singular thing that you'd really pull out?
Yeah, I think, look, it depends on your expectations. I mean, I was trying to be realistic. When all the initial specs came out and there was talk of 8K and this, that, and the other, I wasn't even questioning whether or not that would be limited. I mean, I just knew that it was never going to be, the camera that I was going to buy if I needed to shoot IMAX features. Yeah?
Yeah.
In that form factor of camera, I mean, we already know, looking at the industry across the board, high frame rates in 4K tend to be an issue with managing heat. So let alone getting into 8K. So I knew there would be something, and I was really hoping that it would still stay, as a mirrorless camera, but that it would still have that SLR form factor and feel. And, for it to have that, I was pretty sure that there were going to be limitations on high frame rates in 4K maybe, and any 8K shooting. So I think the important thing is it depends on people's expectations. My own personal opinion is that it's without a doubt, to me, and for what I do, it's the best stills camera in the industry at the moment. Okay, I mean, it's like I just have to have it, and you know, it's the kind of thing that if I didn't use it and continued with 5D Mark IVs, etc., you know, you wouldn't realize you were missing it. But I really wanted the convenience of mirrorless, like the being able to review your images without taking the camera away from your face while continually shooting, you know, not chimping in front of the client to make sure you're getting things perfectly, etc. And I really wanted all that, but I wanted the performance of Canon's top-end DSLRs. And to me, it does that and more. And more. I mean, it's an incredible camera. I mean, in a couple of areas, Canon have jumped from being lagging in certain areas like IBIS and eye detection.
Yeah.
To, in my opinion, they've jumped to the forefront of the industry now, which, you know, while waiting for the EOS R5 and to see what they would do when they finally went, you know, fully into the mirrorless game, there was always that worry that you were holding on to all these lenses and you were thinking when they finally do it, will they get it right? And, you know, I was just delighted they did. Now, back to expectation. On the flip side, that to me is the key thing about the camera. If you are primarily a still shooter, okay, if you need speed, it's fantastic. I mean, the speed varies depending on conditions.
Yeah.
But in optimal conditions, I was able to get ridiculous speeds. Okay. But the speed does vary depending on shooting conditions, how, you know, much pressure is on the AF system, etc. Your shutter speed. But if you need resolution, it's also there, because I was trying to be cautious because I only had the camera to test for maybe a week, 2 weeks. And my initial impressions when comparing files from that camera to the 5DSR, for example, were that the resolution is also like stellar. I mean, I wouldn't notice the dropping the 5 extra megapixels. I know that's not huge, but when you go in and you look at the detail on files side by side, you would generally spot it. You know, you'd see it. And I'd miss resolution because I'm a bit addicted to detail and, you know, color, tonality, gradations and all this kind of thing, because I did back in the day shoot quite a lot of medium format. But yeah, the expectation is the big thing. It's the best stills camera on the market with some really cool video features, as long as you don't need to rely on some of the higher, the more high performance video features for too much time. You know, as a bonus, those are there as a bonus to what is the best stills camera in the industry for me by a mile.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, you've sort of answered the last question. Was, you know, would you recommend the R5 to our listeners? It sounds like you really are. I mean, you know, as you say, the sort of taking the caveat of you know, the restrictions in the sort of 8K and 4K over a set amount of time, but for stills, you know, it seems like the camera to have at the moment.
I honestly don't think it's touchable. I had my concerns. I was a little cautious, of course, you know. When you see specs come out and you see marketing info, I tend to be a little bit cynical. Actually, I tend to be a lot cynical. I do tend to, if I have found that a camera or a series of cameras performs well for me, I will stand up for them, you know. And I think that's only right.
Yeah.
You know, so I'll stand up for the camera and I'll recommend it if it works for me. And to be fair, I was optimistic because since I started using the Canon stuff, I mean, lots of manufacturers do make great stuff, etc. Canon, in their history, haven't always got everything right, but I've found that over the years that no matter what, I've been able to rely on the equipment I use from Canon more than anything else. And I have used other systems down through the years. So with that, I was still very cautious. And I wouldn't for a second recommend it until I figured that if I were a betting man, I'd be able to bet to bet my entire worth, which isn't a lot, by the way, but I'd be able to bet my entire worth on the fact that camera wouldn't leave somebody down past recommendation, as long as it covers the type of thing you do. So high resolution, it's great. It's amazing detail. Actually, the other thing as well, I mean, even the quality of the imagery in that regard, if you look at things like the noise and the dynamic range, they surprised me also. But just the performance of the camera, if you need to get a shot, you know, and you're under pressure, this is the camera that's not going to slow you down, for sure.
Fantastic.
So I have, like, you know, my next two bodies are going to be EOS R5s. So
wow. Well, that's a great recommendation. And I mean, as we say, people can read more about the camera in your full review in the magazine. But just to sum up, where can people find out a bit more about you, Michael? Where can they see some of your work and find out a bit about more what you offer? Because I believe you do workshops and photo tours as well.
Yeah. my website, which is probably, do you know have you ever heard the phrase, do you have this over there? You know, a cobbler has poor shoes.
Yes.
Yeah. My website, which isn't the most up to date with my more recent work, I will admit, is www.mosullivanphoto.com. Okay.
Fantastic.
And that's got, it would have, there's a contact form in there. A lot of the time, the photo tours don't end up getting up there because they're filled out by the waiting list. So people can contact me through the contact form to get on the waiting list for workshops or photo tours, etc. But our commercial site is osmcommercial.com. And what would be really, really great if people want to subscribe to our YouTube channel, which is it's called OSM Photography on YouTube, right? So it's youtube.com/C/OSM Photography.
Great stuff. Well, thanks again for your time, Michael.